124. 124. Twitch UTV124. TikTok UTV_124. And Flow TV channel 124. Remember, UTV, TV for you.
I can't
Welcome to the show. Thank you very much for joining us. It is September 13th, 2021. It is Monday. We begin the sort of work week this way. I want to say I hope that you guys had a good weekend. We are back now and there are so many things to discuss. Before we do that, let me just say good morning to people like Brian O'Geese. Thank you for watching. Miss Karen Tobier as well. Every time I think of you, I think of Baby and the great work that you did there. Also with Pesita Theodore, Benny Hippolyte, my dear friend Winston Lubin. I hope you are having a good one. I always look forward to the constructive criticism, if we have to call it that. And of course, Miss Morella Joseph, I know you're watching, so thank you very much, and happy birthday goes out to Happen in Viewfort. I know it was your birthday yesterday. I hope you had a good one. Now, there are some things, like I said, that we have to continue just opening up and delving into some of the issues. And we had the discussion on some people now coming out and speaking in ways that they couldn't have before. And maybe it's a good change for not just individuals, but for organizations as well. So I expect the SLMDA, maybe the Chamber of Commerce, people that were noticeably very silent on some of the issues come out. And what I have realized is that the National Youth Council didn't really, and that was one of the issues that I had, the National Youth Council didn't have much to say with regards to COVID and the handling of it. And even when we saw a lot of things being done, young people being accosted in the street and all of that, nothing came out of it. But however, we're seeing a change, and maybe that's the change we need to see, where people feel now emboldened to say some of the things that they're seeing. So the National Youth Council has released a letter, maybe of advice. And you know, when you look at civil societies, little organizations like that, of course you need that kind of consultation. You need people to say what they feel. So and it's very strange, very different to speak about the NYC, because we haven't had a chance to even read anything that they've said, because so many of the other issues that have come out, they've never said much of anything. So let's do that. Let's put up that image with the NYC letter detailing some of the suggestions that they have for the nation, for the current government. Do we have that? Okay, I think we have some issue with that, but like I said, it is something that we do need to look into. And while we await that, the issues that I think they're speaking of is that they do not like the handling of it. They want a bipartisan sort of partnership happening between the current government and this administration and the opposition. And I don't want to sound okay, maybe I'm not naive anymore, but I know for a fact. Do we have it now? Okay, let's take a look at it. It says here, sound the alarm and rethink our national approach to address the COVID-19 virus immediately. The country is at a crossroads as the NYC. And we are calling on the government of St. Lucia to rethink its approach to dealing with the COVID-19 virus. It is important that every St. Lucian add their voice to this big appeal and advocate for an enhanced approach to fighting the virus. Given the current spike in active cases, that is 2,364 as of Monday, September 6th, the St. Lucia National Youth Council proposes the following measures. Launch, like I said before, launch a bipartisan task force led by the National COVID-19 Management Center to execute a holistic strategy to address COVID-19. 2, government must give consideration to a further scale back of economic activities to reduce movement over a short-term period. While this may be necessary, it is crucial for alternatives to be discussed in public forums to present a clear trajectory for the coming weeks. Reformat all activities, notably ceremonial proceedings, from in-person to virtual. Increase the Ministry of Health's local testing capacity by establishing mobile facilities in rural communities to improve the responsiveness of the system. Establish more isolation facilities for better monitoring COVID-19 patients. Cease to divisive and misleading rhetoric from all entities of the management of COVID-19. It says here, nearly 6 weeks post the July 26 general elections, political leaders are yet to publicly acknowledge their direct role in facilitating potential super spreader events with the several mass crowd gatherings convened during political campaigning. These actions were misguided and needlessly jeopardized the lives and livelihoods of many St. Lucians. We urge our leaders to be more responsible and prudent in their stewardship by putting country over political interests through their words and deeds. To date, the science says that COVID-19 cases are surging at an approximated daily average of 150 cases over the week. This frightening truth calls for leaders inclusive of government, the opposition, the private sector, civil society, and non-governmental organizations, influencers, activists, students, and informal groups to lead by example whilst encouraging their constituents to adhere to all the protocols instituted to fight the virus. The National Youth Council is appealing to St. Lucians to get armed with credible information from health professionals, particularly on the vaccines, in order to make well-informed decisions. We can go lower because I wanted to speak to on what they were talking about. It says here, young people, we call on you to act responsibly in protecting yourself, family, and friends against the virus. According to the data from the Ministry of Health, more citizens aged 18 to 34 are being infected with COVID-19 over all the other age groups. This is also the least vaccinated age group. While your constitutional freedoms are protected, you ought to honor your responsibility as a citizen, which is to follow the recommended health advice and protocols for national security. May we continue to be resilient and stand as a united force in this fight. Stay safe. So, I just wanted to go through it because it's been so long that we've heard anything from the NYC that when you do actually get something, I think you need to just read it, understand it in its entirety. And we'll deal with one thing at a time. I think that they are right in saying that the political leaders, political people involved in the campaigns right before elections, need to come out and say something about, your responsibility in part of that. And I think it's not something where you can point at any one political party. Both are guilty, and if the opposition, if the United Workers' Party will not want to accept responsibility or accept blame for at least part of that, that's their business. That's their business. You already know that's their MO. But I believe that the SLP now in government should do something of that sort. It's not the entire fault of the campaigns. I know young people were out on the boat right at the same time. People were having their own personal zest. All these things were happening. But in your part of this, I think takes responsibility for it. So I agree. I think it is different too when we're hearing some of what is being suggested. And I think, to put it in perspective, hearing the CMO speak of the cost, we talk about, the life and death, we talk about the businesses, but the actual cost of dealing with COVID in a particular way, I think it's something that we need to know as well.
The domestic COVID-19 pandemic has gutted central government coffers. Since March 2020, the government has had to scramble resources and find millions in unbudgeted money to manage the local COVID-19 public health emergency. COVID-19's financial toll stagnated St. Lucia's economy last year, forcing austerity measures in the public sector and attrition in the private sector. The government's COVID-19 response plan has also come at a, quote, ridiculous cost, according to the chief medical officer. Managing the pandemic has racked up millions in the last 18 months.
It has been exorbitant because a lot of the services that were provided to the public for COVID was provided free of charge. The isolation, the quarantine, the testing is another ridiculous cost. The cost of a PCR is about $150 US per test, and we provide that free of charge to persons who have signs and symptoms. So do the math. It has come at a ridiculous cost because we've had to increase staffing complement, resources, and also divert some of the resources from other important areas as well.
Securing PPE gear for healthcare workers, providing free COVID-19 testing to the public, procuring privately owned facilities to use as quarantine and isolation centers, and getting the recommended medical equipment and medication to treat patients has all come at a cost. To date, the Health Ministry has analyzed more than 73,000 COVID-19 tests. At about 270 EC dollars per test, government would have spent more than $19.7 million providing the service free of charge to the general public. Despite the astronomical price tag, the CMO says she has advised the government to continue footing the bill for as many COVID-19 related expenses for as long as reasonably possible.
Is it sustainable moving forward to keep providing that free of charge service to members of the public?
For public health measures, we always look at the cost of implementing the measures and the cost of not doing it. Given the impact of COVID-19, the preventable measures, the cheaper measures always come first to have it in a more cost-effective way. So it makes sense to leave testing, for example, to leave clinical care for COVID-19 free of charge, because if someone gets sick and they don't have the funding, the cost of a lot more persons getting sick from them not knowing their diagnosis would be a lot worse in terms of the impact of the country. So at this point, we would recommend, given the nature of this infectious disease, that the services and the testing and those remain free of charge to the public.
St. Lucia is currently experiencing a fourth COVID-19 infection wave, which is likely to continue overcharging central government. Rihani Isidore, NBC Prime.
So again, putting everything in perspective, and to do that, let's take a look at some of the stats that we're seeing up until September 11th or 12th, thereabout. I think it would be important to look towards gender infections and gender deaths. Let's take a look at the next image there, just so we understand what it looks like, and that's, of course, from Choice News. Choice Media Network, that's their graphic, and I think they're doing a really good job at that. By the way, who's ever doing the graphics for the government, please, can you up it up? Thank you. So the female death profile, youngest, it says here, the oldest for female, that's 52, and for male, 80 people. Let's go on to the next so we really get an understanding of the positivity rate there. The WHO recommended 5%, and St. Lucia's positivity rate from August 29th to the 11th of September. You could see there by the 6th of September, it was going down and now it's rising. So that's the situation that we're facing here with people dying as well. Now, when we go back to the National Youth Council press release, the letter to the government, it is their duty to speak on what they're seeing. But when you speak of this bipartisan movement, we would love it in a utopian world, and in what I think should be, I think we all would respect it, especially when you think, health really transcends the petty politics. But that is not the case. And I understand what the NYC is doing. I understand that we want to see people coming together regardless of party politics. But even in the face of death, even in the face of what we're seeing in this pandemic, even when we saw the former administration gaspiller $500 million have to go to COVID. Your pas jamais mette. They never helped. You never put it where you wanted. You'll put it in roads for elections. And months later, say something like I viniek day a lot bagay. When there are people that are dying, you know what they were doing? Let's take a look at the first picture. That's what they were doing. Fede posting Today is Yellow Friday. Hope you have on your yellow. I voted Flurbo. So say Munaka Moa, the people that, it's not them that caused it because they voted Flurbo. Stay safe, follow the protocols, UWP Yellow Friday. Batting and looking happy while you're doing all that. Let's take a look at the next one. I remember too, this other lady, UWP's Yellow Friday, proud UWP. Don't blame us, we voted for Flurbo. You know, then you'll do hashtag COVID follow COVID protocols. Like you care. Like these people care. And I think some people, and I will not even say it's just the United Workers' Party, you know, because there are hacks on both sides, but particularly with the United Workers' Party supporters, there is a disregard for any kind of empathy, any kind of humanity. It's just, you know, revel in it and, you know, feel like you're getting some kind of chance to make a chance de acidoko. And that is not how you're supposed to be looking at a country. If you want to if you want to see what I mean when I say that, let's take a look at the next image here. There was a young woman, 26 years old, who died of COVID in her home in Vieux Fort. 26, went to Viva Compre just like me, and that happened. She's also a mother. And of course, we know that it's sad. That happened on September 2nd. And the response to that from United Workers' Party supporters, let's take a look at the next image. I think it is despicable. It says, can we zoom in, please? Zoom in a bit, please. Okay, so it says it's sad because she was advocating so much for this current government during elections time, and for her to die due to the mishandling of people she held in such high regard is disgusting. And somebody says, the woman that died, she was paid in full. So she was paid in full because she was a supporter of the Sinusha Labour Party. So it is supposed more. Pisita Labour. Pisita Labour is supposed more. She was paid in full. She got what she deserved, but then they'll still say, accept my condolences. Then you'll have other people say, that's very despicable of you. So that is where we are. People are dying and others are saying, she got what she deserved for being a supporter of the Sinusha Labour Party. So the NYC, I understand where you're going. I understand what you're saying, but this kind of vitriol, this kind of thing that this opposition, what they're trying to do, I don't know if they're trying to, like, you know, make a space for Chasney. That's insane and it's disgusting, and it really does show that if we're in a space that, you know, nobody can agree with anything, not the health pandemic, not you know, do you vaccine or not even to show respect to the dead, to a 26-year-old woman who died leaving her children behind. None of that. Instead, you will revel in it, laugh at it, put it on a social media post and say y'all don't care, and they say it's not y'all because y'all didn't vote Labour. So that is the reality right now, and I hope that the executive members of the NYC, I know you'll have a lot to deal with your president and everything else, but I want us to be realistic with what we're asking. Now, we're still on that and how this COVID nightmare is being politicized. And of course, United PAC will use what they can and try to get clips and try to mislead the public. So we move. Let's take a look at the next image there where United PAC is saying the hypocrisy of Ernest. I don't know what you'll have with Ernest. It says there's such hypocrisy, St. Lucians. The boys on the block need to teach these guys a lesson like they normally say by any means necessary. And then there was a clip, so let's listen. Let's look at it.
They've lost the trust of the people of St. Lucia. And the longer the state of emergency continue, the worse it is. Mr. Speaker, I never appreciated the effect of a curfew on people until I sat with the boys on the block. And he said to me, boss man, when curfew come, where are we going? The number of persons in a little house in some of the communities. Some of the guys live and done with their parents home, their mother, in most cases, home. When they have to go in at 7 p.m. until 5 o'clock next morning, what do? They don't have television. Some of them don't have Netflix. And they started explaining to me the effect of that day in, day out, Mr. Speaker. And how it builds up that tension and that anger in them. Now for me, My house probably, so I can always move between the kitchen, the living room, and the bedroom. I mean, that's a free room. Some of us in here, members opposite, probably have houses that have, 6 bedrooms, 15-room houses. So they have space. They can move about in their homes. They don't understand the social tensions of being indoors every single night from 9 p.m. until 5 next morning. And to do it for 5 more months. For 5 more months. And remember, we always said from day one, we were opposed to the state of emergency because we believe the government can have restrictions under other legislation, but we would have supported the government then because we felt we had to fight the COVID crisis. So, Mr. Speaker, you really need to ask, do we need to have in this country 5 more months of the state of emergency, given the social tensions that we have in this country? And that
So that's what they're peddling now over social media, that there is a hypocrisy about the state of emergency and that sort of thing. But I want us to remember, because people are so quick to forget, when we had the first 3 state of emergencies enacted, it was for 2 weeks, then 2 weeks, then 2 weeks. And then there was just 3 months, then 5 months. I do believe that the St. Lucia Labour Party had a problem with that, and I think it's too soon. It's too soon to say whether there's even any hypocrisy. If you come in and you already get the state of emergency that's been going on for months now will end on October 15th. So do you just disregard it, rescind it even in the middle of a spike, or do you keep what was there, and then after October 15th, then you'll see what this new administration will do? Will they continue month by month, or will they do it by weeks, or what is going to happen? So I believe that right now they are keeping it the way it is, and if some people see it as hypocrisy, that is your right. If some others say, that's what they think is the best thing at the time, that is also their right. But I do believe that it will be after October 15th. Remember, October 15th they thought would have been election because of the state of emergency, Papa Shastedi, no. That's what people wanted. That's what people had a problem with. And I think it wasn't just Ernest Hilaire, it was other, Dr. Kenny Anthony, others that had that sort of thinking. And when you really do think, and that's what the people who understand where Ernest Hilaire is coming from, that you are confined to a space, it's a small space, you cannot go out, that kind of thing, and how it could affect you mentally. And for the people who do live in their big homes, I vex with you, that's your life. But for the people who do have that and they do not remember, or they do not know what it is to not be able to take your father's boats or the fleet of boats you'll have and go out and have a good time and nobody will know because you have that kind of power, or you'll have your pantry that you'll have groceries in that can last for 2-3 months. When you'll take containers and bring it down, so you're okay, you're good. That is a legitimate concern. It was then and it still is now. If we're going to have the curfew and the lockdown for an extended period of time, how will that affect people? So I think it was a justified concern. But just so we remember the issues here, it's not about the state of emergency. It was for how long it went for, what they were trying to use it for. If you do not remember, let me remind you.
Predictions by many of the experts are that we're not going to see any form of solution for the next 2 years. I think it's safe to say, in the environment that we're in today, and within the next year, a pending election, that we would not want to stay, Mr. Speaker, in a state of emergency. Within the next year, a pending election, that we would not want to stay, Mr. Speaker, in a state of emergency. So I think that the Attorney General's office has come up with a great alternative. And that alternative, Mr. Speaker, is to create a specific act. And what is that act? That act is simply the accumulation of all of the SIs that we have done.
The Prime Minister says his administration and party would not call an election during the declared state of emergency.
We will continue to review the situation and make the determinations to when we think the right time to have the election is. But maybe I'll give some people some little...
Give us something, yeah.
That my party would never, hear this, never consider and never have elections during a state of emergency. Okay, and I want to say to you why.
That's when you have to start.
St. Lucians, whether they're members of my party or members of the Labour Party, okay, have a sense of fairness.
What is the point of the extension of the state of emergency? That's the question being asked by several St. Lucians who believe that the extension is a contravention of their freedoms and liberties. Well, according to Prime Minister Alan Chasney, it only really serves one purpose.
That the SOE, the state of emergency, is only being used to regulate the curfew times. And so without the state of emergency, we would not be in a position to implement the curfew times. And as you've seen, the curfew times along with the economic activity are the two things that we use to try to keep the COVID under control.
I was startled this morning when the member from Miku South said that the only reason why they need a state of emergency is to impose a curfew.
The curfew. Curfew can only be instituted through a state of emergency.
The reality is that there was no need to have a state of emergency to extend to October because the Constitution does allow the government to recall Parliament during a state of emergency. Look, for example, Mr. Speaker, at what Section 55, subsection 5 says. If after a dissolution of Parliament and before the holding of a general election of members of the House, the Prime Minister advises the Governor General that owing to the existence of a state of war or of a state of emergency in St. Lucia, it is necessary to recall Parliament, the Governor General shall summon the Parliament that has been dissolved to meet.
Whether in fact the state of the emergency is going to impede or derail the ability to have what they consider to be a normal election. And even to that extent, thinking that the state of emergency is being deliberately done in order to somehow cause the elections to be delayed. Now, Mr. Speaker, there are lawyers and constitutional people and people who've been in the civil service as permanent secretaries who clearly understand how to read the Constitution. I will never deny them that fact. Not complicated, Mr. Speaker. Not complicated. So, what did you have? How is the state of the emergency going to stop the election from taking place, Mr. Speaker? Since when a state of emergency affects it? When in St. Kitts they had a state of emergency, did it affect them in having an election? When Jamaica had a state of emergency, did it affect them having the election? When Trinidad and Tobago had elections with a state of emergency, did it affect them having an election, Mr. Speaker? The answer is no. Categorically. Okay, Mr. Speaker? It does not impede the ability to have an election.
June 6 will be 5 years since the last election was held in St. Lucia. June 6. And the people expect there to be elections before June 6. And if you decide, Mr. Speaker, if the member from Miku South decides that he's not ready for elections yet, that he will be defeated in the next general elections, and he wants to go up to the 5 years constitutional life of Parliament, that's his prerogative. But he will still lose the elections, Mr. Speaker.
There are a lot of things there if you're going to talk about hypocrisy and with concern to the state of emergency. When you heard the Prime Minister speak of, you would never, ever have elections during a state of emergency. Who would do that? That would be an uncaring government. That would be callous. That would be wrong. Exawin. Next breath, he says, it doesn't affect any other person. So we got a lot of back and forth with the then Prime Minister, and he was looking for all ways to win an election, even after, 5 years of treating people the way he did. And now, let's not forget too, that his father, Alan Shastney's father, Michael Shastney, Papa Shast, they used a state of emergency. They wanted to use it to win an election. And Shastney, the older one, Michael Shastney, doesn't have the subtle sort of quality about him. It's just blap, he's just telling you what it is. There is no pretense there. So if you have forgotten the sahos and the hacks of what the state of emergency meant at the time, even now with this fourth wave, people are trying to quell this, people are trying to get it under control. The state of emergency has stayed in effect, and if you are to call Ernest Hilaire hypocritical, do it after October 15th. See if he will keep it 2 weeks or however long, or whether he'll do the same thing that he was against Shastney for and keep it for 4 months at a time. But for now, it is the way it is. And if we have to remember, then the elections had a lot to do with this state of emergency. When they had the Flubbo train, that was, everybody hands on each other, doing all kind of things. But they didn't know how to deal with pandemic, because you got to stay home, beat your pan, put it on video, put it on Facebook, and it still had the effect that it was going for. So now you can't compete with that. You know what happens? Just release some of the protocols and let people come out and do what they're doing. And that is why I do believe that the parties have to take responsibility for their action during the election campaigns. I do not believe it is all their fault, but you need to take responsibility. Let's say Flubbo apart sa fanyen, ek yo teni Flubbo train na, sa pa protocol kuma. So buze alido, go and have your motorcade, go and have the national motorcade. You'll need it to do it. The same thing with some of the Labour Party supporters. Y'all were out too. So take some responsibility. And also, young people were out themselves having social activities and going by the beach, going on boat rides. You all know what it was. You all know Zote Cafe. So it is just an honesty that is needed. An honesty that is needed in what has happened on the ground, the reality of the situation. And once again, it will be my honor, my pleasure to remind you, Shastney, and a lot of you that thought you would have won by using any kind of underhanded means. And the state of emergency was one of the tactics that he wanted to use.
Father say, my father say, my father say, yes, unto my Jesus. Oh, my father say, my father see. Oh, my father see, my father saw. Yeah.
You know when the election should be? October 15th, 2021.
That is right.
That's the Michael Shastney. Yeah. And whether government has to bite the bullet or not, come out open and say, look, this is the situation.
It has to.
And do what they have. And because I think we're now in April, okay? So we have all of it. April, May, June, July, August, September, October.
So you're talking 6-7 months.
You know what you can do in 7 months?
Yes.
The number of projects that will be completed.
So take away. You know what you can do in 6-7 months? Win an election. So you wanted to go October 16th to have the election because of the state of emergency, and that's one of the reasons why the trust for that, it was gone, because it was being used for all kinds of things. And now that the United Workers' Party, you've lost. And for some people, it will take some time getting used to. For some, they will be in denial for however long. And for others still, they will wake up every day intending to somehow create some instability, and maybe miraculously that Shastney, the Lord of all, the person that made them lose, well, he was one of the main reasons why the United Workers' Party lost. But then they will keep him. Maybe for the same reason why they had him in the first place. Maybe you need him financially to give and assist. We must have Takmun Kipo, MMNP. They were doing DJ for y'all. Janine McIntyre, what's her name? Janine McIntyre Girodi. You owe people, go and see if you can get to pay them. And for the others, people like E.T. that's still on radio, doing all what he's doing. He have a place to stay. Go and help, go and see what's happening there. You'll have Alan Shastney, who really was one of the main factors in you guys losing, and finding every single way to try to get him back, even when people are dying, you will laugh and you will find some way to do it. And I think it is despicable. And what Shasi doing now? Let's put up the next image. Let's put up the next image, because y'all tried everything. Y'all did everything. And now Alan Shasti refused to come in the House. Tomorrow, September 14th, the House of Assembly will be meeting to take the Drugs Prevention of the Misuse Amendment Bill through its final stages. The anticipated change in the legislation will allow for the private use of marijuana for recreational purposes. Let's go to the next one. Let's go to the next clip, because it says here, at this sitting of the House, Alan Shastney will again, for the third consecutive time, fail to appear to make his contribution to the debate in the name of the people he is supposed to represent. The former Prime Minister continues to show his contempt for the people of St. Lucia. As leader of the opposition, he is entitled to the equivalent of a ministerial salary, just over $10,000 per month. Will the former Prime Minister collect this salary even though he has failed to turn up for work for over 1 month? That's from the St. Lucia News Online. We'll be keeping watch over this one. So that is the reality on the ground. This is what we're seeing, the state of emergency, people dying. I understand what the NYC wants. And by the way, NYC, I think maybe it would be time to find a way to really connect with young people, people who are still hiding to have their zesses, people that's still trying to do these things. I think now would be a good time to do that. I know that you guys had a lot on your plate with everything, but I think now would be a good time to do that. And this is where we are. If people are talking about hypocrisy, people are talking about that, let's just put it flat out on the table and we'll make our decision then. Okay? We'll be right back.
We can win this war. Get vaccinated. We're taking our life back. Get vaccinated.
As a journalist, the onus is on me to inform and educate the populace so that they are empowered with information needed to safeguard them against COVID-19. What I would say to you is focus on the end result. The process is quick, it is safe. You have health practitioners all around you. You will be fine. Take a deep breath and just focus on the results. How will I take my life back after protecting myself against COVID-19? Well, I will travel to Europe to visit family after so long. I can't wait for that day.
Get vaccinated.
This message is brought to you by the Bureau of Health Education of the Ministry of Health and Wellness.
Watching UTV, TV for you.
A lot of people just don't know the Constitution, and you can't blame them. I mean, I don't really know it that well. I mean, I'm having to try to understand it much better now. But you know, for most people, I don't think the Constitution is a living part of the way they think politically.
When we entered independence with the Independence Constitution in 1979, we did within a particular economic, political, social and cultural context. And things have evolved over time, and it is necessary over time, therefore, for us to engage in some kind of reflection on what is in fact the supreme law of the land, which is our Constitution.
It served well, but it has done its time, and it has to be amended. It has to fit the time. We have to move forward. A constitution cannot be stagnant.
One of the complaints which has been leveled at our present constitution is the fact that there is very little connection between the average person and the content of the present document.
Her Excellency Dame Paulette Louise says constitution reform is on the government's agenda. She explained in her throne speech on Tuesday that while St. Lucia's post-independence constitution has served the country well, it was drawn up within a particular context and circumstances. The changing local and global environment was highlighted in making a case for urgent review of the constitution. It was lamented that millions of dollars was spent on a constitution reform commission, which undertook some quote excellent work and recommendations.
This report was debated in these chambers, but there was no clear indication of what the next steps would be, if any. The general public is left with the impression that this report has been discarded. My government has listened to the voices of the people, and during this session of Parliament will reopen the report of the Constitution Reform Commission for public discussion with the objective of arriving at consensus on recommendations for the reform of our Constitution.
Public Relations Officer for the Ayanola Council for the Advancement of Rastafari, Aaron Alexander, says he's very pleased to note the government's intention. However, he says it must be noted that while in opposition, the United Workers' Party should have spoken out more forcefully on this issue in the interest of the public. He says the UWP aided the government to gang up on the people on constitution reform.
We were very happy that the government had actually instituted such a commission, but very disappointed when we realized that both the government and the opposition gang up and they decided to shelve the report. It is important for the people to the power of governance to be given to the people, where the people every 5 years they choose a team to lead the country, but there must be some kind of recourse where those persons that we've elected, if they're not performing, there must be some kind of recall that can be effected if you have a parliamentarian that's not serving the greater good for the constituency in which they were elected. So if a certain amount of signatures have been acquired from that constituency, then forwarded to the Governor General, then a by-election could be forced within that particular constituency to change that rep. The people must be given that power.
Alexander says St. Lucians have been shortchanged on the issue, and ICA is calling on civil society groups to play their part in the future.
Some of them tend to be very quiet, whether it be for political reasons or whether it be for the fact that some of them believe, well, Jesus will save us, and all they talk about, some civil society groups, especially the religious groups, they only base their mind on Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. But we the people have to stand up for our rights as well. And if we refuse to stand up for our rights, there is no God that we pray to that's going to be willing to support us and stand up with us.
ICA has for some time now had a committee in place to deal with issues relating to constitution reform and human rights.
Labour Party leader Philip J. Pierre has refuted claims made by the Prime Minister during a live televised interview where he stated the opposition was not committed to the constitutional reform process. According to Pierre, the Prime Minister stated that the former legal consultant to the Constitutional Review Commission, Kim St. Rose, could not, quote, get the Labour Party to come to the table, unquote. Pierre referred to the letters of correspondence between him and St. Rose, which he says disproves the Prime Minister's assertion.
By letter dated 7 February 2017, Ms. Kim St. Rose invited the opposition to nominate 2 persons to a parliamentary committee to identify and agree upon common amendments to the Constitution. By letter dated 28 April 2017, Ms. St. Rose reminded me that I had not made my nominations and also indicated that the government had not yet named their nominees. On 5th September 2017, I nominated Mr. Claudius J. Francis and Mr. Calix George Jr. to be the opposition nominees to the committee. By letter dated 4 January 2018, Ms. Kim St. Rose acknowledged my letter and my nominations.
Pierre has thrown the Prime Minister's statements back at him, suggesting that it was he who was uncooperative.
To the best of my knowledge, the Prime Minister is yet to nominate members of the government side. I call on him to make public the letter forwarding his nominations to Ms. St. Rose. On 6 March 2017, I participated in a panel discussion with the Prime Minister on constitutional reform, indicative of the opposition's commitment and respect to the process. The question is, who did not cooperate with Ms. Senchos?
Pierre says the comment made by the nation's leader is only an attempt to assign blame to the opposition for stalling the constitutional reform process.
So I know that we've had a lot of people saying constitutional reform as some of them just to get votes, and some of them just to make it seem like there will be some kind of change. And you know, you have to ask then, will we be seeing that this time around, even with all of the promises? And I know that when Dr. Kenny Anthony won in 97, 16-1, people thought, you know what, that could happen. You have a constitutional lawyer, you have a majority, undoubted majority, huge thing there, huge win. And you know, if you whatever you want to see happen, just make it happen. Just make it happen, and maybe the same can be said this time around. If you got essentially 15-2, that is what people must be expecting. But I think when you have to look at constitutional reform, it's also a decision on referendums as well, and that normally is a case where people get to vote on certain issues, and that is a sort of tricky thing because maybe for other countries in the world that could be an issue, but I know for small island states like ours in the Caribbean, it's not worked well for us because everything comes down to, of course, what we know being just politics. So it's not really people looking at the issues, but who's saying what. And you also know that members of the opposition will oppose for opposing sake sometimes, and the people who have won the government in the administration in power at the time would probably be lax on certain things, and they'll be looking at certain things because they've already won, so they're just looking at other things to do. So in our history as a Caribbean, it hasn't worked well for us, these referendums. I think only about 3 were passed successfully, but it does give rise to, once again, the discussion on what we want to see. Well, right now, what I would want, and what I'm seeing with maybe some of the comments and the calls that people are having and the conversations people are having, not the hacks, not the assaults, but people who do want to see the country move forward. If they do clamor for some sort of constitutional reform, if they do make it an issue, I think it would give this government some room that they need to think about, that they need to do. But with that in mind, I think there was a really, really good discussion on the state of the nation regarding the constitutional reform. And this is not just to give people make way, which is the truth. And by the way, I heard too that Janine and some others, Sarah Flood Bober was also saying that she couldn't pay the people because she thought, sorry for changing the subject, but I just remembered that I was told that people, even the Flubbos, can't you believe Flubbos calling me? I'll not say names. Flubbos calling me, wanting other people to know or wanting it to be out there that they are owed monies by the United Workers' Party, and they're being told by people like Sarah and Janine that they thought they would have won. So they don't have the money now because they didn't really think that they would have lost. So, be patient or whatever, which also makes you think. You think you would have won so much. I imagine if you're going to take ballot boxes and change the dates and Febagai, there is no way that you could ever think that you would lose. I don't know what to tell you, other Flubbo supporters that's still being owed. But that's just party. I'm talking right now, we're talking about country. Let's go back to the topic where we're talking about constitutional reform. That's a discussion that we need to have. And even though you're a Flubbo supporter or Labour, there are some things that we need to see. Maybe, how many terms should a Prime Minister be allowed to have in the country? Of course, the issue of the set election date. All of these things are things that we need to discuss. But, what would it be? The intricacies of it, I think, were really discussed in that conversation.
In some of the islands, it seems to be a lot more of symbolic gestures. I mean, even
cosmetic.
The case of cosmetic gestures at the moment. In the case of Barbados, it's speaking about going the route of becoming a republic, changing the head of state. But in terms of actual power, it still will remain with Mia Motley. as Prime Minister, she'll still be,
yeah,
very powerful.
Well, in the context of the discussion we started with about, what a constitution means, I think we can maybe underestimate the symbolic significance of becoming a republic. We have to remember our history as former colonies and the painful legacy of colonialism. The way we became independent, etc. I think there's something to be said for Caribbean identity and Caribbean nationalism, which is not the sort of unhealthy kind of nationalism, but just a sort of positive affirmation of Caribbean identity. And I think the sense I get from Barbados is that Barbados is saying, look, we don't see the need for us to be some sort of sort of satellite of some great
no longer
British
Bimshire.
Yeah,
they want to be Barbados fully.
Exactly, and that the highest office, not political office, but the highest office, which is the head of state, which is what is currently the Governor General. Barbados is saying, that should be something that a Barbadian should be able to aspire to, and it shouldn't be the case that they're merely a representative of the Queen in Barbados. I think it may not have a lot of resonance for everyone, but I think it has some significance and symbolic importance for other people, and I would argue it's part of completing the journey of independence and the journey of establishing real nationhood and identity. And I would say it's the same thing here. Ask people today, what is the significance for us of having the Queen of England as our head of state? And I would just also quickly, mention here that when you look at the way, for example, this may seem a bit off topic, but I think it's actually quite relevant. When you look at the way, the British monarchy is developing, the allegations about the way that it's treated Meghan Markle, the way that the British society, for example, has related to this woman of mixed race entering the
royalty,
the royal family. I think it's only appropriate that countries, frankly, of black people ask themselves: is this an institution we want to continue to show this level of loyalty to? Is this institution represent who we are?
Right. But at the end of the day, it is just a bit of a populist move, wouldn't it be? Dominica has a president, Trinidad has a president, and some people may argue the politics in those countries is not very much different from us right here.
Well, I think
I'm not saying that we shouldn't have it in a package, but don't we run the risk of maybe some politicians saying, well, this is an easy victory for us, so we'll just do that little tinkering here, and we've given you constitutional reform.
So I agree with you, and I disagree with you a little bit. I think I just argued why I think it's a little bit more important than that in terms. Yes, it's symbolic, but some symbols are more important than others. But I do understand where you're coming from, which is, should we be satisfied when we talk about constitutional reform? Should we be satisfied that all we're talking about is just changing ourselves from a monarchical democracy, constitutional monarchy to a republic? Is that enough? And I think that's really where your question is headed, and I agree with you. I think constitutional reform, real constitutional reform, as I said earlier, has to be about rebalancing the scales of power between people and government. Look, I've been a lawyer for 21 years. I practiced law in the courts for a few years before I went back to study, and I was then in the commission I was there a member of the commission examining constitutions around the world for 6 or 7 years. We were in an intensive process of research and understanding how constitutions work, etc. And my personal view is that the way our system of government operates is mad. It's basically a system in which one set of people get elected every 5 or 10 years, and basically dispossesses or discriminates, depending on the nature of or the character of the people involved, half the population. And then you just have to wait for 5 years while all sorts of damage is done until the other half then get their chance. And it's a constant cycle of, half the population dispossessed, the other half,
in their glory.
In their glory.
Yeah.
Now that isn't true of every government, and we've certainly had, good administrations here that have really been concerned about the development of as many of us as possible. But the basic problem remains: when a good government gets voted out and then a bad government gets in, that bad government can do damage that is irreversible. Or even if it is reversible, the cost of reversing it is so high, and the cost to the country is so dear that, what sense does it make? When sensitive patrimony is handed to, is given away on questionable terms, how do you get that back? If a government enters into a bad contract, which may have been secured through stupidity or malfeasance or a lack of legal advice or corruption, but there's an agreement. How do you fix that situation? The problem with our constitution and our system of government, Calix, is that there is just too much power in the hands of a small group of people, and that small group of people don't have enough constraints. There aren't enough constraints on their decision making to slow them down, to make them consider all of the implications of their actions, or to stop them from doing something very, very damaging. The constraints that we have on our governments are all informal. It's the media. Yeah. It's occasionally a court case if you can identify a law that they've broken. But otherwise, a government if it's badly managed and the character of the government is rotten, it can just run amok, and there just aren't any proper systems of checks and balances. So my personal view is that it's a kind of madness to continue with the system of government we have. And constitutional reform is about helping us as a society have governments that are more accountable to us, so that we can, yes, promote the best good for the majority of us, but also so that we can ensure that the decisions that are being made when it's a bad one can be restrained. Also that we can ensure that our children and our children's children can grow up in a society where you don't have to be dispossessed for 5 years just because of a color. It's just madness, and we can't continue like this.
I think, again, you hear all of these things and it really puts it together. And it's just really interesting to know where we go to now. We've seen excessively bad governance, and all corruption, all manner of corruption and everything else. And it's easy to some to say, maybe you change a party and maybe it'll everything will just be okay. But when you see in 5 years the culture change and people that were going to get things and people that have gotten things so easy, that's not the same anymore. You have to ask yourself whether that will remain, that since that under really bad governance people have benefited from it, will good governance even make sense? Can it change? Or will people be so angry with what they've already known that they will reject it? And I think that was a really, really good discussion on that. And it also asks us, or begs us to ask the question, what would be the first change that you would want to see if you're talking about constitution? Would it be the set election date that has been being promised by so many of the parties? Will it be the power of recall? That is also something that we can look into. If you have a minister that just in an office, could be anywhere, could be home, could be in the ministerial office, masturbating for girls or young girls or whatever, you know, do you then have the power to have somewhat of a by-election, get that person out, have a recall of that sort of minister? There are certain things that we've seen and we just let it go. Let's not pretend the Ebola thing with the Prime Minister saying that, you know, he's standing by his minister. You know, can that happen? Is that right? When you have, if another case can be the dual allegiances, dual citizenship, do we only want a St. Lucian to be our Prime Minister? Is it a thing where people have their allegiances and they can be products of whatever, of wherever, and still be a person that can represent an entire country? What then does that mean? You're seeing some kind of confusion, as we all have already seen. So it's not just the things that people say, like the set election dates, but even what we've seen in the recent past. You know, we can make sure it doesn't happen again. We can make sure that it'll not be an issue. And as Mr. Cox said, it just seems to be a madness. How long can somebody be Prime Minister for? We've seen people go 30, 40 years. Is that right? Should we be allowing that? These are just some of the issues there that I think, well, in my mind, that could be, you know, some of the things that we need to look at. And I don't know what you think should be the first order of business. But anything, I haven't formulated it well in my mind, but anything that making sure that criminals go to jail, that's where my mind is at. I also wanted to see a set election date, because we have, again, all of the things that I'm listing here, we've seen what it can be like, even with the state of emergency that we were just talking about. If you know that the election date is on September 13th, you know, you work towards that, people know what they're doing, there's not as much corruption, you know, you will not be able to use tactics like the state of emergency and everything else, trying to find a way to prolong your time or to make more roads or to get an edge over the other party. These are some of the things that I would like to see. But as we continue in this new way of looking at the issues and making sure that we keep our governments, keep our people accountable, I think these are just some of the things we need to look at, and it'll just, you know, be an area of discussion, a topic that we need to look into in different ways. And I imagine I would try to get Claudius Francis, but I know, you know, the person busy doing big things. But I do hope that he will take my call and the other experts as we continue to delve into this and some other topics. But we have come to the end of the show. I want to thank you all for joining us, and we will hopefully see tomorrow at 11, where we will be doing what we're doing with honesty and sincerity in all ways. And I encourage the people who do not agree with what I'm saying, come forth, call, you know, comment, fair, but people that probably do not agree with some of the things that are being said, maybe you don't think there needs to be any constitutional reform, or like Alex George said, which I found interesting, that people can just, you know, maybe it could be a thing where, you know, you put it out there as an easy political fruit somehow to just take, and people will eat and swallow and they would just love it. And he says maybe that's what's happening in Barbados with, you know, the Governor General, and maybe we should have our own head of state. And you know, it's something, again, that we need to look into. But I don't know whether we will fall prey to the politics where it'll just be the tit and tat on Facebook. It'll just be that sort of shallow fighting between political hacks. I think we need to move forward, move in a new direction. And I hope that this St. Lucia Labour Party administration will lead us into a new place. And it'll be a tall order, but to change the culture that we've seen, when people can laugh at someone dying of COVID, nah, that's not where we need to be. But like I said, I want to thank you guys, and I hope to see you tomorrow. But until then, have Have a good one.
I can't stay.